It's what prick people's ears up to think, well, what are these people going to do next? What's this filmmaking team going to do next? And when we were in Sundance with Shallow Grave, it was then that they gave me the script for Trainspotting and told me that they weren't offering it to me, but they wanted to know what I thought. At the time, when I was sent the script to read, it was the first movie that I will have been in. I worked in television and 2 big dramas, and but I always wanted to, or saw myself working in movies. That's what I wanted to do. And when I read the script, I mean, I just thought that Alex was the most fantastic character to play, colourful, sort of unlikable, but in a good way.
The first thing I heard about Shallow Grave was actually through my agent. It was just the standard way.
The script was very bald as well, sparse. So when I spoke to Danny about it, he liked that aspect of it because I could see and hear from his ideas where he was going to take it. The design was very important. The relationship between the 3 flatmates was really important, and so it was his influence really that made me see what he was trying to make.
Shallow Grave is broadly a simple plot about finding £1 million in a suitcase and the corrosive effect of money on a relationship, which has been a feature of Danny's films really, with Millions and with Slumdog Millionaire.
And then it's the dilemma of what to do with the money and how their relationship exposes itself, and the fractures and the anxieties and the jealousies.
It's very good for greed, to show people's greed, having bags of money, as opposed to some kind of bank account number, where it's sort of like an idea, where you've actually got a bag of money in front of you. It becomes a very real thing that you really want to have, you know. I remember playing the scene around the money in the kitchen and how easy it was to be excited.
1993, when we shot this film, and we were coming out of a recession. We were moving towards a Labour government, and there was this sudden almost pornography about property. And one of the interesting things about the film was people became obsessed with the flat. And the very thing that we were satirising, that desire for property, came back and bit us, because people were asking, could they buy the flat? And of course, the flat was built on a freezing cold industrial hangar, not even a soundstage. And each room was built separately, and we shot it to make it look like it was integrated. People wanted the flat as much as the people we interview at the beginning of the film.
Private. She lives in this world. She's very successful. She's got men chasing after her because she's a doctor, but she doesn't want any of that. She wants more or less to be by herself, and strangely living with these 2 types. She can be alone and isolate herself.
I think what the script was satirising was people who were locating their emotional lives in material goods and property. That was definitely a thing that was happening. They were kind of young fogies. I had the sense there was a kind of loneliness to all 3 of them. You had the hedonism of Alex and the kind of slightly old-fashioned repression of David, and then Juliet, located somewhere. You look at Kerry's costumes there, she's kind of located. There's something not released sexually about all 3 of them.
Annie came from such a strong theatrical background, and we lived together, the 3 of us, and Danny, for a week in a flat in Edinburgh. We
would read scenes over breakfast, and we would make coffee for each other, and we would go to the pub, and we would come back, and we would go. He screened some movies for us to watch at the Glasgow Film Theatre. So we would go there to. We shot the film in Glasgow, although it's set in Edinburgh. And so we just lived together. And although we were going in and out of the apartment became our home for a week.
That was sort of an effort to reenact in our own world the introduction of the new flatmates, the grilling of the new flatmates, you know, us as a bonded team being really awful to someone else. And then, of course, there were other aspects of the film itself, all the doctor stuff. So we went to a morgue, which was pretty extraordinary. And I spent an evening in OE on a Saturday night in Glasgow Hospital.
I remember that one day I went off for a 10-mile run and Ewan went off for a drink and Kerry went off to do what she did, and Danny was sat in the front room with this huge book of images that he had, a big book with, Blake prints and photographs of modern architecture, And it was nice because Danny's process was like, I don't really know why I'm doing this, but here's a book of images, have a look at these. That was quite exciting. And I think it's something that can be well used for actors, because actors are actually will approach building a character in a much more indirect way if asked. I think there was a little bit of an argument about music, because I think Ewan and Danny, I think Danny was hugely influenced by ecstasy, actually, by the acid, what we call the acid house movement. And you can hear that in the film, the techno music at the beginning was a big influence on Danny. So he was listening to a lot of that kind of music. I think him and Ewan had an admiration for Bjork's first album, which drove me crazy. And I was much more middle of the road. I remember putting an Eric Clapton track on and feeling very self-conscious, among these two hip guys.
But it certainly kind of tied us together. It bonded us in a way that led the scenes in the apartment to feel real, that we were used to one another in a way that we wouldn't have been if we just turned up to work. It was all of our first movie, Danny's first movie, John's first movie that he'd written, Andrew's the first movie he produced, my first movie. It wasn't Kerry's first movie. I don't know about Chris. No, I think Chris had made movies already. But there was this real sense of this new talent on set all the time. And alongside Brian Tufano, who was incredibly experienced and one of Britain's finest DPs. So there was a really nice flavour on there. The set itself was really problematic to film on because they built it off the floor. We wanted to be able to... we used a real stairwell for the shots where I'm shouting down to Cameron when he's leaving and stuff. We shot in a real stairwell, but we wanted to be able to look up as outside the door and have people arrive at the door. So they built the whole apartment maybe about 2 meters off the floor of this, which was just an empty warehouse. I mean, they probably just got the cheapest place they could afford.
We were raised on a raised platform. The whole of the apartment was on a raised platform, so there was a lot of noise every time the camera moved, which, was problematic.
The other thing about the set was that it was freezing cold. We shot the film, I can't remember when, but it must have been in the autumn at some point. And it was not a soundstage, it was just an old warehouse. So it was freezing. And I remember, the scenes when we're sitting in the living room and I'm watching football at one point, or I'm wearing a T-shirt and a pair of shorts, and I look around and the whole crew is standing with parkas on and woolen hats and scarves. And you can see people's breath, and I'm sitting there going, oh, cheers, thanks a lot.
Everything was very basic. The dressing rooms, we didn't have a dressing room. We had the makeup and costume all happened in the same room. I don't think there was any division. I think me and Ewan turned our back when Kerry was getting changed. There was a little area for us all to sit between takes. But it was all about the work.
It had an amazing look to it. Brian Tufano's camera work and lighting is so brilliant in the film. And just their choice of shots and the way they shot that huge apartment, which they built as a set.
And I'm saying, how much, that scene? I couldn't get that right. And Danny knew I couldn't get it right. I think I didn't know how to go from the mousy man that I'd been playing to the rage. And Danny did a clever thing, again slightly abstracted, rather than directing me by saying, I think if you play this line like this, he came up to me and he said, have a look at the frame, Chris. And I'm stood there, and those two are at this point, because it was on me, are under the camera. And he said, have a look at the frame. And Danny stood in the frame. And it was kind of 3/4 shot. And there was this huge expanse of wall behind me. And he said, I need you to fill all that space. And he didn't mean by flailing physically. He meant by intensity. And it's an abstract way of directing somebody, isn't it? You know, it's not just play this line a bit. It's just said, I need that space filled. And I got it. I don't know. I look at that scene now and I'm still not happy with it. I should have gone a lot further. But I was young and I was scared, and, you know, it was a sheet with what looked like a football underneath it, which was in fact the severed head of a murder victim. The head had been fished out of the Clyde, and it was being held there because it was part of a police investigation. And I think there was a couple of fellas above me and a lady over here. And Danny said to me, he said, right, Chris, I need you not to blink for a minute. And I was pissed off with Danny because he'd not told me that the night before or the week before, because I'd have practiced. You know, because I'm on the slab and the camera's above me. And there was another thing that, as well as not blinking, because of the camera rotates above me, so I had to do something with my eye line. I actually had to move my eye line with the camera to give the appearance of staying still. Does that make sense? Because the camera was moving, my eye had to move with the camera, so I lonely and paranoid. And probably that was all very useful to the film. But, you know, you're a young actor and you're scared. You're operating on fear of failure. I never thought I was the greatest thing, so I always think I was going, how the hell did I get this part? When are they going to sack me? When are they going to find me out? And that probably worked for that fella, you know.
I felt part of a filmmaking team, and it became one of the most important things in my life at the time was being, I felt like it defined me as an actor, being Danny Boyle's actor and in a film produced by Andrew MacDonald and written by John Hodge.
That's the thing about Danny, is that he is so incredibly encouraging and trusting and, you know, incredibly manipulative in the best possible sense of the word. The way he guides people to delivering their best is really inspirational.